This is Death or Prison, brought to you by leanonmeusa.org.
Welcome to the Death or Prison podcast, brought to you by Lean On Me USA. I'm Oswald Newbold.
And I'm Kevin Sabath.
And to my left here, we have Mr. Holland Ricky White. He is a part of West Central Florida AVP, which is Alternative to Violence Program. What is that all about? Give us some insight. Give us a little education on that.
The AVP program basically is teach you how to not be violent. It's a nonviolent program. We utilize a mandala, and we try to give different facets of that mandala as to think before you act. Expect a nonviolent solution to a problem. So basically what the program entails is that we show you and give you techniques to utilize to avoid a violent confrontation.
Oh, that's awesome. That's amazing.
This sounds like a good program, alternative to violence program, basically exactly what it says it is. How did growing up in the 60s, pretty much shape you going into that direction in your life?
Growing up in the 60s was very turbulent for me because it was during the time of segregation within the United States. The Civil Rights Bill had not been passed during that time. And I grew up in a very turbulent neighborhood. It was crime infested. It was ladies of the night, pimps, hustlers, drugs, alcoholism. And I was in the midst of that environment, and it had a effect upon my life, upon my growing cycle, because, as I stated, Jim Crow wasn't a very good part of my life, because being a black man, you were only able to do certain things. And I felt as if at that particular time that I wasn't a human being. I felt out of place. I didn't have an answer to what was going on within my life. A lot of turmoil, a lot of resentment, a lot of anger, a lot of hate because of the way that I was instructed and informed to conduct myself on a day-to-day basis within the society during that time. It was told by my dad that if you go downtown and you encounter someone of a different color than yours, you bow your head, you keep your head down, be submissive in a sense.
Wow.
And I couldn't understand that. I thought that was very degrading at that time. So I rebelled.
And how old were you at this time when you realized that, that was degrading to you for you to look down?
I was 11 or 12 years old.
Okay.
It was very, very difficult times to adjust.
I can understand. So what city and state you grew up in?
I grew up in Fort Lauderdale in Broward County.
Broward County.
Here in the state of Florida.
Okay.
I attended high school, attended grade school, Dillard Elementary. I attended Dillard High School.
So growing up in the Jim Crow era in Broward County, Florida, by your father telling you to, bow your head when you walk past a person that's of another color, did you ever experience direct violence during this era?
No,
Okay.
I didn't experience violence in that area. However, I did experience violence within the neighborhood in which I lived in.
Okay.
And as a result of that, I guess I learned how to protect myself, how to survive. And I created a name for myself. At that time, we had gangs, but gangs weren't indicative of the gangs that you have today.
Correct.
We were more or less territorial.
Right.
We took care of our particular area. And I became a part of that environment. I became a part of those guys. And as a result of that, as I stated earlier, I was very bitter. I was very, very, very angry.
So, Ricky, let me ask you. You said at that time you were very bitter and very angry. were you mad at yourself, mad at the world, mad at society, or being that young, if you just didn't know who or what you were mad at?
I was mad at myself in a sense because of the environment in which I lived in. I went to school, and some of my classmates were living in different areas of Broward County. At that particular time, they weren't called the suburbs, but they were called a better place of living. And I was raised in the ghetto, per se. I was raised in Fifth Avenue. Fifth Avenue was the heart of the black community in Broward County at that time. It was infested with crime. And the only image that I had was those that were within my environment, my immediate environment. So my expectations, I didn't have any positive expectations.
Okay.
I grew up, like I stated, very negatively because of my environment.
That's understandable. In 1967, tell us about what was so pivotal or so imperative about 1967.
I'm glad you asked that question. I went home one day in 1967, and I looked in the mailbox, and there was a letter from the President of the United States stating to me that I had been inducted into the armed forces of the United States. At that time, I said, wow, I'm going to the Army, I'm going to the Marines, I'm going somewhere, you know?
So you didn't sign up for, you didn't enlist, nothing, you just received the letter in the mail in 1960.
I received the letter in the mail. However, I immediately went to a Marine recruiter because I had it in my mind that I wanted to be a Marine if I had to fight for this country. Okay. And he told me at that particular time that they weren't accepting because I hadn't finished high school. Okay. I was still in high school, per se. And he told me that I needed to finish high school. So I went to the Army recruiter, and I showed him the letter. He said, well, good, we can place you in the Army. I said, okay. So I was inducted into the Army at Coral Gables, Florida, and immediately sent to Fort Benning, Georgia, where I did my basic training. I did basic training at Fort Benning, Georgia. Okay. I did my AIT, basic infantry training at Fort Benning, Georgia. And then I stayed at Fort Benning and took my airborne training at Fort Benning, Georgia. Immediately, I was transferred from airborne training to Fort Sill, Oklahoma, to take artillery training also. After I finished artillery training, I was sent to Fort Lee, Virginia to take parachute rigger training. I took parachute rigger training, and the orders came down that I was going to Vietnam, the Republic of Vietnam.
And how did you feel about that? Dealing with John F. Kennedy being the president around this time, Martin Luther King Jr. speaking out against the Vietnam War. How did you feel as a black man at that time, in that era, going into war to fight? How did you feel about that?
I felt very impelled by going because what was told to us as troops were that we were going fighting for a cause. That cause was to curtail communism from spreading from North Vietnam to South Vietnam. And I felt as a soldier it was my responsibility and my duty to honor those orders that were given to me.
Growing up in the 60s, Jim Crow Act, the country, you feeling like as if, your country has pretty much turned their back on you because you're being ostracized because of the color of your skin. And then fast forward almost 17 years later, you're going into the military to fight for that same country. Did you think that was kind of like an oxymoron, kind of?
Oxymoron? Yes, I did at that particular time. However, I realized also at that particular time that my training, and by me leaving my neighborhood, leaving the hood per se, and given the opportunity to put a weapon in my hand and given a license to take a life, I felt that this is what my country had asked of me to do. So I didn't have any problem with that at all.
Wow.
I noticed you said something, and I would like for you to share this with the audience. You said you were good. You were good at taking orders, right? But also, I remember at one time with you speaking, also you just was saying how you were mad. So you were able to hold your impulses, but follow the orders for the United States. Were you going through something internally at that time? or were you recognizing anything at the military time? Was your life evolving? Because you left your neighborhood, you left certain circumstances, you seeing more things in life. Do you think you were evolving then, or you were just existing at that point in your life?
I felt relieved. I felt relieved to leave the environment in which I grew up in, to go to different places and see other parts of the world, and to go to perform the duty and the task in which I was given. So by me going to Vietnam, I felt this is the right thing to do. Maybe I can find out exactly who I really am.
How long were you in the war?
I did 3 tours in Vietnam.
3 tours in Vietnam. And after that, your military career continued?
Yes, it did for a couple of years. I went into Vietnam January 1968. I came back in January 1970. I was stationed at Fort Bragg, North Carolina, the 82nd Airborne Division. I was a Staff Sergeant E6. I was a very highly decorated individual, and I was placed in Division Artillery. They called it the body.
Is that the time that you acquired the award, the V device, the Bronze Star?
Yes. I remember the first Bronze Star I received. We were on top of a hill in the A. Shaw Valley called Corregidor. We had 6 105 millimeter howitzer guns, and we were being overran that night. What I mean by overran, we had the 3rd NBA Regiment coming to take that hill and coming to take those guns. Those guns were very central to the Vietnamese, to the Viet Cong, because they knew if they had that artillery piece, that they could create a lot of havoc. Charlie, we called the Vietnamese Charlie. Charlie had a way of overrunning a hill and a position. He had sappers, we call them, and they had sapper charges. And these were homemade devices, which has glass, nails, and explosive in it. And when they went off, they just went in all directions. And we got tight with mortars. They had mortar, and they had 122 millimeter rockets. And they hit us real hard that night. And as we called it incoming. We could felt when an incoming round come in and explode within the parameters of the hill, the area in which we were sitting at. We knew immediately that we had to do our thing. And that night, a satchel charge hit within the parapet of my gun section, and it blew me directly back into my hooch. When I said hooch, this is a place that we dug deep, 3 to 5 feet, in which we slept in at nights. The satchel charge hit me and bumped me to the back of my hooch, and I regained consciousness, and I immediately grabbed my M16 and got on the howitzer, and I started firing what we call MT S2 fuses, multiple time super quick fuses on a 105 round, and we also had what we call a beehive round. I fired a beehive round, and in gun section 3, a guy that was a part of my unit, a 122, came in, and it just took him, obliterated him. The only thing that was left from him was his shoe. And at that particular time, I was told later on that I grabbed my M16 and I just stood up and just started shooting. And the next morning, it was all type of, we call them gooks within in the barbed wire fence that we had as a perimeter. And the commanding general came out and awarded me a Bronze Star with a V device for valor.
And as you sit here and talk, I'm just looking at your face, how you actually are going into that moment that this transpired.
As you can see on the expression on my face is not very something that I like to talk about,
right?
Because it was a very traumatic experience, because of the guy that was liberated was a very good close friend. And you have what you call comrades at arms in the military, and guys that you befriend, guys that you help, assist, and he was no longer there.
Knowing you lost your friend, or your comrade, so to speak, by you being presented with these medals, did it give you some type of self-accomplishment?
Yes, it did. It gave me a sense of being someone, as opposed to me thinking that I wasn't anyone. When I got back to Fort Bragg, I was placed in a unit, and I was given the responsibilities to train newer recruits that came in during the course of this time. And I was like a drill sergeant. I especially excel in PT.
Okay.
We ran foul miles every morning, and we did calisthenics. We did the daily dozen. We call them the daily dozen. And I had a recruit who was a private, had just come into the service. He had been through basic training and AIT, and he was assigned to my particular unit. And we were doing PT one morning, and he was kind of slack. So I told him, I said, "Private, what's wrong with you? You have a problem in doing PT?" And he utilized the N-word to me and said, "I'm not going to listen to anything you said." And at that time, I blew. I lost it.
Now, were you a ranking officer at that time?
Yes, I was a staff sergeant E6 at that time. But at that particular moment, everything that happened in the 60s came back to me during that Jim Crow era, how I had to conduct myself. And I just lost it. I physically assaulted him, and as a result of that, I was court-martialed. But what happened in the court-martial was that my battalion commander was also my battalion commander in Vietnam, who had awarded me my stripes and who had recommended that I receive the Bronze Star. And they busted me down to a buck sergeant, Sergeant E5, and I lost a stripe. He charged me $135 for 2 months. And I no longer had a desire to stay in the United States military because I had went to Vietnam. I had fought for my country. I came back home. I wasn't welcome at home. I was called every name that you could think of, including the N-word, a degenerate, a baby killer. And I was bitter because I knew that I had done what was required of me to do. I knew that I had lost comrades at arms in the Vietnam conflict. And for me to be still considered to be just an end, that was very offensive to me.
Now that you done lost a comrade in the war, you done lost your rank, and you lost your desire to be in the military, what space did your life move in? What direction did your life move into at that time? You done lost the desire. So what's going on with Ricky at that time?
Because of my Vietnam record and because of the record that I accumulated over the time that I was in service, I was given an honorable discharge. I was discharged with an honorable discharge. And I went back home. I went back to Fort Lauderdale. And I went to the Florida State Employment Office at that time and got a job as an unemployment counselor.
Okay.
And I had an opportunity to meet a lot of people that were on unemployment, and the majority of those people were females.
Was that job fulfilling at that time? Or it just was a check to get by?
It wasn't fulfilling. It was just a source of income at that particular time for me. And I kept it for a while, but I had some friends who were involved in drugs, guys that I went to high school with. And guys told me, they said, "Well, Ricky, why are you working at an employment office when you can make more money selling drugs?" I had used drugs when I was in Vietnam. I smoked marijuana, and I drank a lot of alcohol. And when I got back, I drank alcohol very heavily, and I used drugs. I experimented with a lot of drugs, barbiturates, amphetamines, Black Beauties, Juveniles. And I didn't realize that at that particular time that I was addicted. So,
Did addiction have a negative consequence for you at that time? You said, use the word, I was addicted. Did addiction have a consequence?
not at that time.
Not at that time.
Not at that time. But later on, it did.
You know, because sometimes in addiction, it lead us to do things. We become groggy. We may steal. So when we use the word addiction, I asked that only to see what space we were in at that time. But it didn't have its consequences at that moment. It was,
Not at that time. The only consequences, I was what you call a sophisticated junkie.
okay.
I was a sophisticated junkie.
Even in the Vietnam?
No.
Okay.
Vietnam, virtually everybody over there smoked weed
Okay.
and drunk alcohol when we came back in out of the fields. We had what you call base camps.
Okay.
Base camps were areas of a secure area per se. And when we had a maneuver or when we had to go out and do a certain mission, we came back in at a certain period of time and we rest for a period of time.
Right.
We call it R&R, rest and recuperation.
Okay. Okay.
You're unemployment counselor now. You kind of got a little habit going on. Move us forward now with what's coming next. What's going on with Ricky next? Because right now, you in it, you're working, you're living, but where's life going? Let the audience know, where's life going for Ricky at this time?
Well, when I was growing up in that neighborhood, there was a guy. His name was Johnny, and he had a red Cadillac. I'll never forget that. It was a convertible Cadillac, and he had 3 beautiful young ladies step out of that Cadillac one day with me. My family had a restaurant right next door to the Winston Club on 5th Avenue, and we stayed right across the street. And by me seeing him and by me seeing these 3 lovely ladies getting out of this Cadillac, I said, wow, well, maybe one day I would have that. And so I got into what the street terminology called a pimp.
Okay.
I was a street pimp, and I was selling drugs.
Okay, so at this time, you done essentially took on the street life.
Yes.
Pimp.
Yes.
Pimps and drugs. We in the 1970s now?
Yes, we are.
We're in the 1970s. It was an era. There was a lot of moving and grooving.
Oh, yes.
And shakers back
Yes,
then.
yeah.
Well, we want to know where Ricky going right then.
Well, Ricky had an opportunity at that particular time to see a few people. I mean, few people of influence, as I thought at that particular time was of influence. I met a lot of musical people. I met Chaka Khan, and we had a national pimps convention at the Fontainebleau Hotel in Miami, Florida.
You had the big hat. Did you have the big hat
Oh,
on
yes.
with the fur jacket?
Right.
Come on.
Fluorescent colors.
Yeah, I had the maxi coat, the big hat, the tailor-made clothes, the fly collars.
Did you step out of Cadillac?
Yes, I had a hall.
Okay, so
we
you
called
got
it
it.
a hall. We
All
didn't
right,
call it
all
the
right.
Cadillac. We called it a hall.
All right, the
And
hall.
I had what you call a salt and pepper team.
Okay.
Okay, on my right sleeve was a black female. On my left sleeve was a white female. So I went to the Pimps Convention at the Fontainebleau Hotel in Miami Beach, and Chaka Khan was singing there with a salt and pepper team. And they couldn't tell me that I wasn't doing my thing.
Now, were you still using drugs at this time?
Yes, I was snorting cocaine and smoking marijuana and drinking alcohol.
Okay, so you done progressed a little bit in the drug
Yes,
game.
I had.
And you
Okay.
were a pimp at the time.
And I was pimping too.
And you got salt and pepper on the left and right.
Salt and pepper on that.
Boy, y'all better watch out now. Sitting here with Ricky White, explaining his life story to us. Very, very important that you do not miss this next episode. Ricky has a lot more to tell us. This is the Death of Prison podcast. Around here, we say, choose life.
one boy and girl. Maybe we can change the world.